Oh, I know, said Diggory. Of course it won't work. We're still wearing our yellow rings. They're for the outward journey, you know. The green ones take you home. We must change rings. Have you got pockets? Good. Put your yellow ring in your left. I've got 2 greens. Here's one for you. They put on their green rings and came back to the pool. But before they tried another jump, Diggory gave a long, "Oh." What's the matter?" said Polly. "I've just had a really wonderful idea," said Diggory. "What are all the other pools?" "How do you mean?" "Why, if we can get back to our own world by jumping into this pool, mightn't we get somewhere else by jumping into one of the others? Suppose there was a world at the bottom of every pool." "But I thought we were already in your Uncle Andrew's other world or other place or whatever he called it. Didn't you say—" "Oh, bother Uncle Andrew," interrupted Diggory. "I don't believe he knows anything about it. He never had the pluck to come here himself. He only talked of one other world. But suppose there were dozens." "You mean this wood might be only one of them?" No, I don't believe this wood is a world at all. I think it's a sort of in-between place." Polly looked puzzled. "Don't you see?" said Diggory. No, do listen. Think of the tunnel under the slates at home. It isn't a room in any of the houses. In a way, it isn't really part of any of the houses. But once you're in the tunnel, you can go along it and come out into any of the houses in the row. Mightn't this wood be the same? A place that isn't in any of the worlds, but once you've found that place, you can get into them all." "Well, even if you can," began Polly. But Diggory went on as if he hadn't heard her. "And of course that explains everything," he said. "That's why it's so quiet and sleepy here. Nothing ever happens here like at home. It's in the houses that people talk and do things and have meals. Nothing goes on in the in-between places, behind the walls and above the ceilings and under the floor, or in our own tunnel. But when you come out of our tunnel, you may find yourself in any house. I think we can get out of this place into jolly well anywhere. We don't need to jump back into the same pool we came up by, or not just yet." "The wood between the worlds," said Polly dreamily. "It sounds rather nice." "Come on," said Diggory. "Which pool shall we try?" "Look here," said Polly. "I'm not going to try any new pool till we've made sure we can get back to the old one. We're not even sure it'll work yet." "Yes," said Diggory, "and get caught by Uncle Andrew and have our rings taken away before we've had any fun. No thanks." "Couldn't we just go part of the way down into our own pool," said Polly, "just to see if it works? Then if it does, we'll change rings and come up again before we're really back in Mr. Kettley's study." "Can we go part way down?" "Well, it took a long time coming up. I suppose it'll take a long time going back." Diggory made rather of a fuss about agreeing to this, but he had to in the end, because Polly absolutely refused to do any exploring in new worlds until she'd made sure about getting back to the old one. She was quite as brave as he about some dangers, wasps for instance, but she was not so interested in finding out things nobody had ever heard of before. For Diggory was the sort of person who wants to know everything. And when he grew up, he became the famous Professor Kirk, who comes into other books. There was a good deal of arguing, but then they agreed to put on their green rings. "Green for safety," said Diggory, "so you can't help remembering which is which. And hold hands and jump." But as soon as they seemed to be getting back to Uncle Andrew's study, or even into their own world, Polly was to shout "change," and they would slip off their greens and put on their yellows. Diggory wanted to be the one who shouted "change," but Polly would not agree. They put on the green rings, took hands, and once more shouted 1, 2, 3, go. This time it worked. It's very hard to tell you what it felt like, for everything happened so quickly. At first there were bright lights moving about in a black sky. Diggory always thinks these were stars, and even swears he saw Jupiter quite close enough to see its moons. But almost at once there were rows and rows of roofs and chimney pots about them, and they could see St. Paul's, and they knew they were looking at London. But you could see through the walls of the houses. Then they could see Uncle Andrew, very vague and shadowy, but getting clearer and more solid looking all the time, just as if he were coming into focus. But before he became quite real, Polly shouted, "Change." And they did change. And our world faded away like a dream, and the green light above grew stronger and stronger, till the heads came out of the pool and scrambled ashore. And there was the wood all about them, as green and bright and still as ever. The whole thing had taken less than a minute. "There," said Diggory, "that's all right. Now for the adventure. Any pool will do. Come on, let's try that one." "Stop," said Polly. "Aren't we going to mark this pool?" They stared at each other and turned quite white as they realised the dreadful thing that Diggory had just been going to do. For there were any number of pools in the woods, and the pools were all alike, and the trees were all alike, so that if they'd once left behind the pool that led to our own world without making some sort of landmark, the chances would have been 100 to 1 against their ever finding it again. Diggory's hand was shaking as he opened his penknife and cut out a long strip of turf on the bank of the pool. The soil, which smelled nice, was of a rich reddish brown and showed up well against the green. "It's a good thing one of us has some sense," said Polly. "Well, don't keep on gassing about it," said Diggory. "Come along, I want to see what's in one of the other pools." And Polly gave him a pretty sharp answer, and he said something even nastier in reply. The quarrel lasted for several minutes, but it would be dull to write it all down. So let's skip on to the moment where they stood with beating hearts and rather scared faces on the edge of the unknown pool with their yellow rings on, and held hands and once more said, 1, 2, 3, go! Splash! Once again it hadn't worked. This pool too appeared to be only a puddle. Instead of reaching a new world, they only got their feet wet and splashed their legs for a second time that morning. If it was morning, it always seemed to be the same time in the wood between the worlds. "Blast and botheration," exclaimed Diggory. "What's gone wrong now? We've put on our yellow rings, all right." He said yellow for the outward journey. Now the truth was that Uncle Andrew, who knew nothing about the wood between the worlds, had quite the wrong idea about the rings. The yellow ones weren't outward rings, and the green ones weren't homeward rings, at least not in the way he thought. The stuff of which both were made had all come from the wood. The stuff in the yellow rings had the power of drawing you into the wood. It was the stuff that wanted to get back to its own place, the in-between place. But the stuff in the green rings is the stuff that is trying to get out of its own place, so that a green ring would take you out of the wood into a world. Uncle Andrew, you see, was working with things he didn't really understand. Most magicians are. Of course, Diggory didn't realise the truth quite clearly either, or not till later. But when they got to talk it over, they decided to try the green rings on the new pool, just to see what happened. "I'm game if you are," said Polly, but she really said this because in her heart of hearts she now felt sure that neither kind of ring was going to work at all in the new pool, and so there was nothing worse to be afraid of than another splash. I'm not quite sure that Diggory had not the same feeling. At any rate, when they both put on their greens and had come back to the edge of the water and taken hands again, they were certainly a good deal more cheerful and less solemn than they had been the first time. 1, 2, 3, go, said Diggory, and they jumped.